7 years ago, the last movie I saw in theaters before the pandemic was Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. And it was horrible. I still remember to this day watching that film and being dumbfounded by such infamous moments as somehow Palpatine returned, they fly now, and the knife that also works as a map if you stand in the exact spot where parts of the Death Star landed on a planet and hasn't moved in 30-some years. While a film like that would kill most franchises, and I'll definitely talk about that more later, Star Wars is different. Even though that was the last theatrical release for some time, the series persisted on Disney Plus with a final concluding season to the Clone Wars animated series that people mostly loved, some other animated stuff that people mostly enjoyed, and some other live-action stuff that, frankly, most people hated. This also includes the series The Mandalorian, which just recently, 3 years after its conclusion, received a theatrical film continuation, which is the first Star Wars movie in theaters since that disaster I just talked about. Now, to be honest with all of you, at this point, I really don't have much interest in Star Wars, but I wanted to go watch this movie to see if maybe, just maybe, I could experience a good Star Wars movie in the theater after all this time. But before I can give my thoughts on the film itself to you, we need to go back to the start of this show. What is The Mandalorian all about? If you don't know what a Mandalorian is, and I feel like I should answer that before I recap the show here, the simple answer is that they are a group of cool armor-wearing bounty hunters. And that's exactly why people were excited for this first ever live-action Disney Plus Star Wars show. It seemed like it would be a darker bounty hunter series that takes Star Wars in a bit of a different direction that we never saw in live action before. The thing is, that's only sorta what the show ended up being. The other 2/3 of it was essentially a live-action version of a Saturday morning cartoon, as the co-star of the show is Grogu, more commonly known as Baby Yoda, who Din Djarin, more commonly known as Mandalorian, who's even more commonly known as Mando, is first tasked with protecting before forming a true father-son bond with him. And that pretty much happens by the end of the first season. Continuing into the second season, for me, it started to feel like the formula was dragging a lot more with the go to planet, need to do this side quest to fix the ship, go to the next planet thing, while also featuring a bunch of cameo appearances from a million other Star Wars characters, especially from the Clone Wars and other animated stuff, but now in the sometimes bland live-action Disney Plus style. The season even ends with arguably the biggest cameo of all, Luke Skywalker with a weird CGI face, coming to take Baby Yoda under his wing to train him as a Jedi, with a heartfelt goodbye to Mando as he goes off on other adventures. It felt like this is where that particular storyline would finish, at least for now, and we'd get more of the darker bounty hunting stuff that a lot of people wanted this show to be about. But that's not at all what happens. Instead, this storyline is picked up again immediately after in the spin-off miniseries The Book of Boba Fett, where Mando hijacks the show for a few episodes, effectively sidelining Boba in his own very limited series where, instead of Boba Fett doing cool bounty hunter stuff either, he becomes the ruler of some town on Tatooine. Very odd choices all around, and more of not giving people what they actually want to see, which I think is why this show kind of fell off culturally. Like, The Mandalorian Season 1 was a huge thing. In the subsequent seasons, I don't know anybody that really talked about it, because it seemed like the focus started to become more and more on all the different cameos, on all the little random adventures, and all the cute Baby Yoda stuff so they could sell merch for it. And look, there's nothing wrong with being a show that's for all ages and kind of fun family adventure stuff, but that's most of what Star Wars already was, and compared to what people wanted to see, which was a more unique take on this universe, but instead we just kind of got more of the same with all the problems that the Disney Plus shows seem to have across the board, MCU included, with weird pacing and weird editing and weird dialogue and flat visuals and all of that. But anyway, this takes us to the final season of the show, which had more of the same cameo fest side quest, Baby Yoda bonanza, that some people genuinely enjoy, and I don't think the show is really that bad either, I'm not trying to say that, but a lot of others didn't really care about due to the dwindling ratings and review scores, but at least it included the overarching storyline of evil space Gus Fring's cloning plans, Bo-Katan from the Clone Wars restoring Mandalore, and Mando and Baby Yoda going off to live on their own. That's where the Mandalorian series ended. I thought it was just fine. I didn't think it was nearly as interesting as it could have been, and I think that's why myself and a lot of other people maybe weren't really disappointed with it, but just kind of ended up not caring about it by and large. And now that brings us to this new movie, aptly titled Star Wars: The Mandalorian and Grogu. Honestly, they could just throw Glup Shido into one of these titles and most people wouldn't even notice. Anyway, what's this big return to the big screen all about with this brand new Star Wars movie anyway? Well, the film is really just a random adventure of Mando and Baby Yoda. Nothing more, but nothing less. Certainly better than The Rise of Skywalker. It's a movie that appeals mainly to fans of the show, even though you don't have to watch the show to understand this. It is a standalone adventure, and also appeals to children because, let's face it, the show has always been geared more towards the younger audience than it has towards the people who wanted the bounty hunter stuff. But hey, like I said, like a lot of Star Wars content is for a younger audience anyway. That's just the way it is and not necessarily wrong. It just, it's not really what people wanted from this thing, as I already mentioned. You know, people want some darker, more unique things like, you know, Andor. But look, it's a very simple movie. It's not groundbreaking at all, but that's really not a bad thing. Visually, there are some cool moments, but a lot of it does look like that bland Disney Plus style. The music is as good as it always is in Star Wars. There's some really great tracks in there. There's also a lot of fun puppet work in the movie with an entire 10 to 15 minute segment just focused on Baby Yoda trying to get Mando healthy again. It's very evocative of the 80s style puppet films and things like that. And there's some cool action in there as well. It's you know, there's some fun moments. Honestly, I don't know if I'd ever watch this movie again outside of doing a big Star Wars rewatch, but it's an okay movie. I don't really have that much to say about it except for what I just talked about, but there are things to like, and honestly, I'm really not sure why a lot of people think it's terrible. And that's not me trying to lead into a funny segment where I'm going to say why people think it's terrible. I just think it's a fine movie. It's okay. It's nothing groundbreaking, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But yeah, I thought it was okay. But while I do think it's okay, I can understand why people just don't care about Star Wars at all anymore. You know, I wasn't a fan of the sequel trilogy for all the dumb things they did. I wasn't a fan of most of the Disney Plus show for how bland they were at best. And while I thought this new movie was okay, it just didn't really do anything noteworthy or interesting for me. I think the best way I can explain why something like Star Wars has kind of lost all of its cultural relevance is that it tried too hard to be like Marvel, which is ironic because the MCU is such a success. But instead of feeling like each entry in this Star Wars universe was a new uncovered chapter of this mysterious saga like old myths and legends, we had to be inundated with a million sort of low-quality spin-offs of each and every character that are all supposed to tie together MCU style. It felt oversaturated, creatively lacking, and more focused on nostalgia for the most part, of just pointing at your screen and seeing these characters who are in animation who are awkwardly in live action now. It didn't play to the kind of restraint, or I guess the better word might be mystery, that gave Star Wars the feeling of this epic tale that's being uncovered. The big exception to all of this would be the show Andor, a prequel to Rogue One, which is already a prequel to A New Hope, which explores the early days of the rebellion against the Empire. Now, while that isn't exactly unique, it did it with a very strong point of view, a mature tone that was different from what was done before, and themes that weren't heavily explored in Star Wars as much. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that's really all people want from new Star Wars things and new anything, part of a bigger franchise. It's offering new, engaging ideas and or presenting familiar things in ways that haven't been done before. If it doesn't really do anything to stand out, then I don't think it's going to stand out, you know? I mean, Star Wars will always have an audience, and it will always have a place in my heart, but how many of you even knew it was coming out, or even now remember that I'm making this video and you're watching it, that it did come out? I mean, I watched it shortly after it released in theaters, and I don't even remember when it released. Time is weird. I'm slipping here. And even several months ago, I was talking with a friend about how no one really seems to care about Star Wars anymore. And while I thought the new movie was okay, and I can't stress that enough, that yes, I think the new movie was okay, and I don't think all of Star Wars under Disney is bad and woke and terrible, and women can't be in this franchise, blah, 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 that a lot of people are like because they're weirdos online and just can't, accept that other kinds of people exist. I think the new movie was okay, but I don't think that anything has really changed, you know? This is the first Star Wars movie in theaters in 7 years, and it's still not really hitting with people, I guess. The clearest example of how we're seeing this unfold is that this brand new Star Wars movie has been annihilated in terms of box office reception and impact by the now extremely popular indie film Obsession. And for good reason. As someone who has seen both movies, Obsession is the film with a much stronger visual style, noteworthy performances, engaging execution of its concept, and moments that actually make you feel something. It was probably one of the most disturbing movies I've seen. Not in that it was so straightforwardly scary, but that I found myself cringing nearly the entire time I watched it. That was kind of the point. Bear, the main character, his story begins with this very realistic portrayal of how isolating grief can be and how you latch on to certain things in hopes that it'll fix your life, before becoming an equally realistic showcase of just how uncomfortable it can be to watch someone crumble under the weight of their own fear that prevents them from making any real moves in their life. Then at his lowest point, he makes this wish, this magical wish that he didn't even think would work. And yes, at points it's understandable because he's at his lowest point and deep down doesn't actually believe that something like that would work, but then it does work. His wish that this person that he works with, that he sort of is friends with, would love him more than anyone else in the world, it works, and he spends the rest of the film essentially justifying the rape of Nikki, the person I was just talking about, and her entire being because he's just too much of a coward to have risked asking her out like a normal person. It's horrifying because unlimited power has been given to someone so horrible, but it's even worse because for as outlandish as that wishing thing is, there are nice people out there who would do this exact thing if they could. I guess it's more eerie than many horror movies I've seen because it's fairly realistic. I mean, yes, the whole like snapping a twig and that makes your wish come true no matter what it is not realistic, and it's not even a unique concept, but there are people out there who are so obsessed with others that they would act like Bear or like Freaky Nikki of their own volition, even without a magical stick. But this movie shows that even those closest to us could become monsters if given the slightest opportunity to do so. The whole movie just made me feel uneasy in exactly the way that they wanted you to feel. Okay, so I know I just went on talking about Obsession longer than I did about the Mango and Grogu movie in this video that's supposed to be about Star Wars. But I think the fact that I have so much to say about that film is kind of the point, is it not? You might wonder why Star Wars has fallen off in terms of popularity in recent years, and I think that's the answer why. For most people, it's never really been about the brand, it's about the final product. If Obsession was a movie without strong performances or anything else noteworthy, would people care? No, but because it did have those things, people did care. Since Star Wars has been a very inconsistent franchise over the years, that's exactly why it's in such an inconsistent state now. It sounds simple enough, but it really goes to show how even the mightiest empires can fall. That's a funny pun for Star Wars for you. And how the cinema landscape is kind of changing. People aren't lining up for big cinematic universes or popular franchises just because it's the next chapter. Like I said, this is the first Star Wars movie in 7 years. People aren't going to see it just because it's Star Wars, though. People don't have FOMO if they don't care about what they're missing out on, you know? That's not to say the Mando and He-Man movies are bad. Side note, I actually haven't seen the He-Man movie, but I'm not at all surprised it's flopping when it's got such a big budget and seems like a film that would have released 10 years ago, and not during this indie film resurgence. Also, who even really cares much about He-Man anymore? I'm not trying to talk bad about the franchise, but can you really blame younger audiences for not wanting to go see a He-Man movie? I don't know. But it does mean that audiences would rather spend their hard-earned money, especially in this economy, on things that feel unique and new. If anything, though, this sounds like a negative, but I think it's actually a positive. Competition is healthy, and now that Obsession has beaten out Star Wars, it means that the next Star Wars film has to try harder to succeed, at least in the numbers game. Hopefully that means we get more projects like Andor, which, like Obsession, has a really strong artistic vision and a concept that it wants to explore. Now, as I'm approaching the end of this video here, I just wanted to say that I've struggled for a while on how I wanted to articulate my thoughts here, because I felt like I was coming at it from this stance that movies like modern Star Wars or He-Man are all terrible, or that only one type of film should exist. And I think there's room for both to exist. I think you can have the very strong, artsy indie films and the fun adventure films. But as far as why they aren't as powerful as they once were, films like Mandalorian or He-Man, I wanted to explain my thoughts on why that is. But like I said, competition is good. Hopefully this means we get more creative visions from indie filmmakers and from big blockbusters too. But since this is the end of the video, I'd like to know your opinions. How do you feel about Star Wars, and more specifically this Mando movie? What about Obsession? Is an indie film like that more your thing? I don't know. You can watch both kinds of movies. They can both exist. It's clear to me why Obsession is beating Star Wars and what Star Wars has to do to really succeed here. But what about the future of cinema as a whole? That might be too big of a question to ask, but whatever your answers may be, let me know in the comments, and I will see you all next time. But until then, goodbye.